Ukrainian officials says Russians have targeted the steel plant where troops and civilians have been holed up since fighting intensified in Mariupol. Meanwhile, human rights groups are speaking out about war crimes, alleging Russian troops are using sexual violence as an instrument of war. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, joined with her UK counterpart, are vowing to tackle these crimes and bring those responsible to justice. I spoke with Minister Joly about that on Friday. Minister Joly, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Rosie.
I wanted to talk to you this week because you and your counterpart Liz Truss wrote this op-ed about sexual violence being used during the war in Ukraine. Of course, we've seen this in other wars, but it is alarming here. And you both said in that op-ed that it has yet to be treated as seriously as other war crimes. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there is a taboo. I think that also it is difficult to investigate. And so that's why not only do we want to bring this issue, which is sexual violence being used as a weapon of war, at the forefront of the conversation, but also like landmines, like chemical weapons, we need to make sure that there is more international norms that are governing this issue. And so that's why we're backing the Murad Code, which was spearheaded by Nadia Murad, the Nobel Peace Prize. And at the same time, we want to bring it before the International Criminal Court of Justice in the context of their investigation on war crimes and crimes against humanity.
What is happening in terms of gathering documentation of this? As you say, difficult to talk about, but I would imagine also difficult for the women involved to say this has happened to me. So how do countries like Canada and the UK help in the documentation of that?
What is interesting in the Murad Code is that she's highlighting, Nadia Murad is highlighting how we can make sure that we help survivors deal with the trauma, but also that we bring them to a point where they feel comfortable, and that we set standards in terms of investigating and making sure that we get their testimonies. So that's what we want to do. And we want to make sure that also the people investigating through the OSCE, for example, who is doing a fact-finding mission in Ukraine, or through the International Criminal Court, the ICC, that the Attorney General also is investigating this issue. So obviously we know that a lot happened in Ukraine. We saw the horrific images in Bucha and Irpin. We're extremely preoccupied with what is going on in Mariupol, but we know also that women are used and children are used as weapons of war and are weaponized and are also used by Russian forces to make sure to put a lot of pressure on on the Ukrainian people. And that we know is extremely preoccupying, because we know that sexual violence is a lasting trauma.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said that international humanitarian law has not merely been ignored, she said, but tossed aside. So as we've been talking about, documenting any of these crimes is important, but I wonder how confident you are that the perpetrators of those alleged crimes will actually be brought to justice.
Well, you know, we know that accountability is a big issue here. And so that's why we need to not only use the processes we have, which is, like I mentioned, the OSCE, the International Criminal Court, but also we need to make sure that we bring this issue in the limelight, that it is something that is being discussed, and that also the prosecutor have also the resources to do the investigation, and that they can go and meet the women and children that have gone through this horrific experience. So the next step for me is to really bring that before the G7. I'm having a meeting of the G7 in less than 3 weeks in Germany. Of course, my colleague Liz Truss, who is the Foreign Secretary of the UK, will bring that also at the table, and we will make sure that other like-minded countries continue to really build that consensus regarding the question of sexual violence in war, which is happening in Ukraine, but which we know is happening elsewhere, in Myanmar, in Ethiopia. And we know that that was clearly part of the conflict in Bosnia and Rwanda and other countries that were torn by war.
A couple more questions. One about the G20 meeting this week of finance ministers. As you know, your colleague Chrystia Freeland walked out of that meeting when Russian officials began to speak. The government, though, has said it doesn't think Russia should be part of the G20. Ultimately, that is a conversation for another time. But there are other leaders who believe that talking to Putin and listening to Russian officials is important. The UN Secretary General, for instance, is traveling to Russia to talk to Putin and your counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, this coming week. Where do you stand on that? Do you still see, do you have a desire still to speak with Russian officials? Do you think that that is still an important part of this, resolving this conflict?
What I said is I would not sit at the same table as Sergei Lavrov. That is my position, and I'll continue to defend it. At the same time, I was in Indonesia a week ago, and I had conversations with my counterpart and with the president of Indonesia, which are right now chairing the G20, to find a solution, because obviously Indonesia is in a tough situation right now, as they want to make sure that they're able to continue to chair this G20, but at the same time, clearly there is opposite views as to what to do with Russia within the G20. We are standing side by side with our colleagues of the G7 on this issue. And meanwhile, of course, as the head of diplomacy in Canada, I believe in diplomacy. I believe in making sure that there can be peace talks. But the role of Canada right now is to support Ukraine, which is facing an abhorrent situation. And clearly we know that Russia's illegal, unjustifiable, unconscionable war is something that needs to be highlighted, and we need to isolate Russia in every single way, economically, politically, and diplomatically.
Finally, speaking of diplomacy, as you know, the UK has decided to send its ambassador back to Kyiv this week. Other countries have done it too. The United States has not gotten there yet. Where is Canada headed? Do you see a usefulness in having the embassy back open on the ground in Kyiv?
I think it's important. I think it is important, symbolic gesture. We need to make sure that indeed we reopen Canada's embassy in Kyiv. We have a fantastic ambassador who has been stationed in the south of Poland for some time with her team. But definitely we're looking into scenarios to make sure that we reopen the embassy, and I'll have more to say in the coming days on this.
Okay. Minister, nice of you to make the time. I appreciate it very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.